Good morning, everyone. I am Hemza Asmaa. I'm a PhD student in the Faculty of Law, Economics, and Social Sciences, affiliated to the Cadi Ayyad University in Morocco. I'm pleased to present for you today my communication about global issues in education and research. Before I start my presentation, I would like to evoke the particularity of this subject to me, because I work in my thesis on the impact of education on economic growth. Therefore, according to the empirical findings, one additional average year of education can contribute to developing economic growth of the countries up to 6%. Therefore, it is very crucial and important to understand the main issues that exist in education, because it is our way to enhance the economic growth and to eradicate the poverty in poor countries. First, I'm going to start with evoking the principal issues that exist in finance and administration area. Then we're going to pass to the educational corruption. And last but not least, we're going to evoke the education quality issues. First of all, the importance of evoking this topic in the actual world context comes from the fact that now it's almost a decade since the countries all over the world have signed to the Education 2013 Sustainable Development Agenda, which main target is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong opportunity for all. However, and due to the latest pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic faced by by the countries, it is very important to us to understand where the different countries stand currently and what are the main issues and obstacles that they have to face. In fact, in the Oslo Summit Commission that was created in the year 2015, they put a crucial reference point to determine the funding needed to achieve the SDG 4 targets. The first point is to allocate at least 4 to 6% of gross domestic product to education. According to my findings, 57% of the countries satisfied this criteria. The second point was to allocate at least 15 to 20% of public expenditure to education. Only 14% of the countries have satisfied this criterion. If you see this presented figure, it is well obvious that the regions like South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa, and Europe and Central Asia have not reached the required numbers by the Oslo Summit Commission, and the gap between low and middle income and low income countries and the upper middle income countries are very wide. So as a result, as a first finding, the world is expanding government funding for education today, but there is still a substantial cross-country and cross-regional heterogeneity. And the gap between the least developed countries and developed countries is significant. The question now is why? Why there is such a difference between least developed countries and developed countries in fulfilling those criteria? From our research and literature review, we found out that the finance area face in developing countries and poor countries face two main problems. The first problem is the growing demand for education, while there is non-stable fund resources. To understand this problem, we have made a figure of development of global cross-border capital flows as a percentage of the gross domestic product. According to this figure, we can clearly say that the inflows has declined since the year 2007 and continued to decline since the year 2010, which has affected largely the low-income countries that depends very much on this source of funding for its basic education. To understand that, we can see here in this figure representing the government expenditure per student in the primary education that the countries with low middle income and low income have known a decrease in the rate of development of their government expenditure per student since the year 2010. Yet, despite the additional funding needs, we found out that 2/3 of low and lower middle income countries have cut their public education budgets since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the joint work of World Bank and UNESCO Education Finance Watch. While only 1/3 of upper middle and high income countries have reduced their budget. And there is still a danger that there will be future cuts much larger as the pandemic continues to take its economic toll. The second main financial issue that we have found in our literature review is the inefficient financial management. In fact, although the World Bank have been known to be one of the largest source of development capital in the field of international education, covering over 160 countries with more than $73 billion, but the engagement of poor countries in the loan contracts have made them passive recipients of the bank's agenda, and as a result, they were obliged to invest in vocational and technical education, ignore the investments in reading materials and maintaining teacher salaries, and they invested instead in workshops and laboratories that were described as useless white elephants by economists. They have shifted their public expenditure away from higher education, which is the most important component of education and which has the most impact on economic growth. So therefore, the least developed countries are in desperate need now for new education reforms of its own. As we had seen in the first section, the existing problem in education funding makes it crucial to safeguard the available resources and efficiently use them. But this wasn't applicable, for most of the world because of the existence of corruption in education, which has worsened the situation for most of the countries. First of all, let's start with a definition of educational corruption. The definition of education corruption derives from the more general set of corruption issues. Like other areas, it includes abuse of authority for material gain, but because education is important public good, its professional standards include more than just material goods. Hence, the definition of education corruption includes the abuse of authority for personal as well as material gain. The educational corruption is evident in two main areas. The first area is the corruption in educational functions, which is the corruption in selection and evaluation system, like the existence of academic violation, the non-existence of a transparent evaluation system, favoritism in school admissions, nepotism, bribery. In our latest findings, according to the latest reports, the percentage of people who had to pay a bribe to use the school is 16% in Africa compared to 8% in Europe, according to the latest global corruption barometer survey results in 2021. The other form of corruption in educational function is the existence of theft and the diversion of funds and equipment. For instance, in Kenya, more than $54 million in education aid funds were misappropriated by ministry officials. The second main area of educational corruption is the professional misconduct. As example, the accepting materials or gifts in exchange for any particular treatment, assigning grades or assessments biased by a student's race, culture, or any other ascriptive attributes, exploiting students sexually or harassing them or making them suffer any form of discrimination, adopting or forcing students to adopt inadequate textbook or materials for personal gain, ignoring the inadequate teaching of colleagues, unequal treatment of students, or misconduct of fellow professionals, utilizing school or university private property for personal commercial purposes, and ghost teachers. Like in Nigeria, it was reported in the first half of 2016, the allegations of ghost teachers or teachers collecting more than official salary, up into 8,000 cases across 4 states. Well, the educational corruption, as we had tried to summarize its costs and impacts, we can say that the educational corruption impacts the different dimensions of education, which are the access, quality, equity, and ethics, and that affects negatively the education outcomes of the countries. But behind behind the finance and material costs that we have seen briefly in this table, the corruption in education destroys the very purpose of education in itself by erosion of democratic values, widening the inequality gap between poor and rich, exposing children to unethical behavior. It also sabotages the development of the countries by creating a future human capital who is incapable of leadership and contributing into the labor force. So as a second result, the corruption in education results from deeply rooted problems in the education system, and the formulation of anti-corruption strategies must be locally owned and locally made to ensure political adaptation and feasibility. We have found some some strategic that were devised by the EU4 in 2019, considering the context mapping and using tools such as political economy analysis, power and influence analysis, and the integrity of education system approach to recognize where corruption exists and identify suggested reforms. Last but not least, the third section, in the third section, we're going to discuss the main problems of education quality. In fact, in the last years, the policymakers across the world have made a lot of effort to expand the education system, and the results were evident on the quantity level, but on the quality level, the problems still persist. In fact, if we observe this figure, we can clearly see that the primarily enrollment rate has known a significant increase in the last years, while the learning index rate has stayed the same in all the regions since the year 2000. One of many problems that we found in our research is the lack of sufficient data that give us the ability to analyze and to make comparative analysis of the different educational systems. Therefore, we have chosen the harmonized learning outcomes as a proxy variable and index of the education quality to make our comparative analysis. So, according to the figure presenting the average learning outcomes by total education expenditure, we have found out that there are countries who spend the same amount on their education expenditure, while their learning outcomes are not the same. So again, we can conclude that the enhancing of education quality in the country systems does not require finding financial resources only, but it has more issues. The second issue that we have found in our literature review is the existence of pedagogical problems. In fact, many least developed countries have a lack of diversity in their textbooks and curriculum, have low levels of books and pedagogical materials, and misuse their educational resources. As we can see in this table that was made by Heinemann, he have tried to categorize countries' school quality according to one chosen indicator of pedagogical system, which is the number of textbook per class. We can clearly see that countries who have a high quality level, like Japan and USA, offer more textbook per students to their class, to their students, and the variety of curriculum packages, while the other countries with a low level of quality offer only one textbook per class, and even some students have to memorize it, have to copy the textbook from the blackboard and memorize it. Therefore, as a result of the problems faced in education quality area, the policymakers have to invest more into improving the quantity and quality of their textbook textbooks and curriculum, and increase the level of books and pedagogical materials, and make more efforts on the quality of their education system. So to conclude, in this existing context where nations have just faced a pandemic and are still recovering from its impact on the educational on their educational systems, a lot of countries, especially the least developed countries and poor countries, have a lot of efforts to do in order to satisfy the target that was described in the SDG 4 and realize sustainable development in the education. We have tried to mention the three main areas that we found, considering that represent some issues in education system: financing and administration, the education sector, especially in low income countries, fighting against educational corruption, and assuring quality education to benefit from its outcomes. Thank you all for your attention, and